Please pray with me. More of you, O Christ, less of me. More of you, O Christ, less of me. More of you, O Christ, less of me. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts bring us closer to, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. I suspect every single person in this room knows that gratitude is good for you. During the conversation, you talked about some of your gratitude practices. Science calls that gratitude interventions. And I'm here to tell you that while we often hear this story of the 10 lepers and there's some judgment, and even Jesus has some judgment, where are the other 9? Where are they? I mean, we don't think about Jesus being judgmental, but that's a little judgmental, don't you think? Science now tells us that actually some people aren't very good at gratitude. In fact, there's even a genetic component to people being grateful. They have found that the CD38 gene, which is the same gene that helps you produce oxytocin, which, as we all know, is the happy hormone. Gratitude, if you have this particular mutation at that gene, you're more grateful. And while you can't change your genetics, gratitude interventions also work. There's been a lot of study about gratitude in particular because it has such health benefits. So it's one of those things, if you want a healthy population and you can see that more grateful people are happier, healthier, live longer, all of that, you want to try to understand why are some people grateful and other people's aren't. So Jesus may have been a little judgmental about it, but the one who is grateful, their faith made them well. The other 9, maybe they were clean, maybe that was fine, we don't know. Did their healing go away because they didn't express gratitude? Luke doesn't tell us anything about that. So how do we become more grateful? Well, sometimes I think it's helpful to talk about what gets in the way of being more grateful. And again, the research that they've been doing at the Greater Good Institute at Cal is really interesting. So I'm just going to put it out here. Name something that you think gets in the way of people being grateful.
Self-pity.
Self-pity, yes. They call that headwinds and tailwinds. And I'll talk about that more. What's another one?
Ego.
Ego. They go a little farther and call it narcissism. What else?
I think if somebody tells you that you're going to get something, then you don't actually think about like whether you deserve it or not. You expect it, and so you're not too happy either way.
Okay. Not sure exactly what category that fits into, but that is a little bit of narcissism and a little bit of the self-pity and probably a little bit of envy is one of the things that gets in the way of gratitude. And here's one that I think the Bible talks about a lot, which is materialism gets in the way of gratitude. If you're focused on things instead of your sort of more ethereal blessings, you're pretty much going to be dissatisfied all the time. Now, envy, materialism, narcissism, I forgot one, Colleen. Self-pity, which they call headwinds and tradewinds. So what's a headwind and what's a tailwind? Okay, a headwind, like when you're flying on a plane and it takes 40% longer to go across the country because there's a headwind, you're just literally pushing against hard things. And headwinds are things like trauma and economic disadvantage or challenges that other people don't have. And a tailwind are the privileges that other people don't have. So I actually love this idea of headwinds, tailwinds, because how that balances out is what matters, right? We all come with some headwinds, and some of us come with lots of tailwinds. For example, when we spend time talking about our economic or racial or gender privilege, I think it's interesting to say, instead of, it's privilege and then feel guilty about it, actually, it's just a tailwind. It just made life a little easier. Because that same plane, if it's got a tailwind, will get there 30 minutes early. It's just not as hard. When you've got a headwind, it's harder. When you've got a tailwind, it's easier. These are things often beyond our control, these headwinds and tailwinds. They're just how our life is, where we were born, what has happened to us, etc. And I remember even with my own trauma history, for example, that it made all the difference in my world when I could take there's a trauma scale thing where, they give you all these questions and you say yes to whatever, and then they give you a number of what your trauma score is. Well, mine's really, really high. And I used to look at that and go, wow, that really stinks. Until they added resilience factors, and you could have a whole list of those, and I had a bunch of those. So a lot of my trauma was balanced by resilience. So yes, people in my family committed suicide, and my father was mentally ill and an alcoholic, but my great-grandmother loved me without measure, and I got good education and good food, and it's a balance. And some of us have more of one and less of the other. But as you can imagine, and headwinds and tailwinds, we usually can't change very much. But what we can change is how we look at that. We can look at that and say, poor me, self-pity, or because all this has happened to me, we can go the narcissistic route and say, man, I am such a victim, I deserve everything. Or we could say, you know what? I'm grateful for that. Am I really grateful for some of the traumas in my life? I certainly wasn't grateful at the time. But in retrospect, especially as a pastor, and of course, people who have a lot of trauma often go into helping professions, because that's actually what makes me able to listen to folks with similar traumas and not say, God, how could you feel like that? Or blah, blah, blah. I know exactly. I never would say I know how you feel, but I do have a greater empathy because I've been down similar roads. I'm not grateful that AIDS decimated every gay man I knew when I was in high school and college, pretty much. And yet, because I buried 250 people before I was 30, I'm really good at facing death. And boy, that's a gift beyond measure. And I'm really grateful for that. At the time, I envied people who didn't have to go through that. But now I'm grateful. So when Simone Weil says, when you get to the place where both suffering and joy bring gratitude, then you're going to be the leper who goes back and says thank you. So I started to have, for our question today, what are some of your gratitude practices? I've asked that before. But let me tell you some of the scientific interventions, just as a means of, offering some maybe new ideas or maybe just new practices that you haven't thought about. So they thought, okay, gratitude is really good for people. How can we get people to be more grateful? Now we know some of them are not necessarily prone to it because they may genetically have a problem towards it. And I wonder if that genetic predisposition also leads to narcissism and some of the other things that get in the way. Don't know. They haven't answered that question yet. We'll wait for them to do more research, but that's my crackpot theory. But let's assume that everyone in this room has got the gratitude gene, because I bet we all do. How can we increase our gratitude? Well, one of the ways that they did it was they invited people to write gratitude letters. So you would literally write a letter of the things you were grateful for and the people you were grateful for and the experiences you were grateful for, and have it be real. And if you were in this study, you had to do it every day. And they had people write in part because you can look at that and they could literally say, well, how grateful on a scale of 1 to 5 were they for this? It's, they could get more empirical knowledge. But you could do this practice without writing it down. You could simply say, as some of you said, Nancy, you come out in the morning and when you get the newspaper, before you read all the horrible things in the newspaper, you notice all the beauty and nature around. That's a gratitude practice for sure. And you could even write more about that, and that would maybe deepen that practice. And Jean Marie, you're tree hugging. You totally did that, and now you know that you are actually in a culture where that's incredibly appreciated. And I'd like to introduce you to our sycamore. We have a great tree on our property. It's an Empress sycamore. Now, she's really big, but I'm telling you, she makes me feel grateful just to think about her. So this idea of writing a gratitude letter. And they also have discovered that gratitude may be one of the things that separates humans in some regard from other species, although in the wake of Jane Goodall dying, we have seen chimps that came back to say thank you to some of their caregivers. I think there are animals that express gratitude in their own way. But we are a species that are actually taught to write thank you notes, that it's considered like the correct thing to do, right? This is a good human being as a person who will write a thank you note. And many of you are very good at that. It's kind of gone out of fashion, but maybe it should come back into fashion. Even if it's a thank you text message. I got a thank you note this morning from Kristen, the young woman who's been a part of this congregation off and on. And she also thanked Terry. So there are ways of doing it. Maybe you're not going to write the formal notes I was taught to as a good Southern girl, but a thank you text, a thank you email. And I don't know, because I can be prone to self-pity, I have an email folder in my emails that just says keepers. And when somebody sends me a really nice email that has gratitude in it or a compliment or something like that, I just file it in that keepers. And then when I've had a really nasty email or something that made me feel like garbage, I can go read my keepers file just to remind me, headwinds, tailwinds, right? There are people who appreciate who I am. There are people who don't. There are times when I'm doing well and times when I'm not. And I can just dwell and pull a little bit of inspiration from that well. What are some other gratitude interventions that you have? Yeah, Jean Marie.
Quit asking yourself, what if?
Oh, what if? That's a difficult question, isn't it?
Yeah.
What if? Just accept what is. What is? Yes, Nancy.
I put up on my wall various thank you things from former students and friends and stuff, so I look at them.
So put some of your gratitude notes and things up on the wall. We have anybody who sends us a card, I have a really nice, big, beautiful bowl sitting on the piano, and I just put them in there. Occasionally I look at them, And they're also beautiful because people tend to send us beautiful cards. But occasionally I look at that and go, oh, yeah, I might not be feeling all the love right now, but it's around. It's around. That's just today. It's fleeting. Any others? Well, this is not a deep sermon, but I will tell you that this practice of gratitude can change your life. I can't help but think about Iris, our 95-year-old matriarch, who, if there was anything she said consistently, was be grateful. And maybe that's why she's 95 and in her right mind. I don't know, but that's another crackpot theory I have. So my invitation this week is to be part of the 10%. Be part of the 10%. Be grateful. Watch yourself for envy and materialism and ego, narcissism, because you don't have to be a malignant narcissist to be a little narcissistic. We live in a narcissistic culture. It's pretty hard to not be a little narcissistic and materialistic and all the things. But whatever those barriers are, pay attention to them and see if you can transform them with gratitude. And may we all find, even in these difficult days, increasing levels of gratitude. Amen.